Hey everybody, it's Juan here, and today I will be talking to you about D.A. Powell's Darling, Can You Kill Me with Your Mickey Mouse Pillows? To start off, I just kind of want to read the poem and just go from there. So let's get started. Darling, Can You Kill Me with Your Mickey Mouse Pillows by D.A. Powell on page 329. And okay. Darling, can you kill me with your Mickey Mouse pillows? When I'm a meager man, with your exhaust pipe and hose could you put me out? When I'm a mite, a splintery grain, a tatter, a snip, a sliver, a wit, a tittle, habited by pain, would you bop me on the noggin with a 2x4, the trifle of me pissing myself, slobbering infantile, or wheezing in the oxygen tent? Won't you shut off the tank? Mightn't you disconnect the plug? Give the cord a proper yank. When I lose the feeling in my legs, when my hands won't grip, and on the thread a reed, a rack, a ruin of clap and flux and grip. With your smack connections could you dose me? As I start my decline, would you put a bullet through me? Angel, no light left that is mine. And it's dedicated for Sam Witt. So the reason I chose this poem is because it's very different from everything that we've been talking about in class. This poem deals with has certain substance and deals with certain topics that a lot of poets are kind of afraid to delve into. Not only is it different in its structure, in the way it's presented to us, but just kind of in how it's dealing with a certain topic that it's very unlikely and very unheard of in a sense. We see here a patient dealing with HIV, and they're dealing with the whole medical process, and it's kind of, to me, in a sense, this whole poem is a monologue of this patient's thoughts and kind of struggle and mental state through the whole through his whole process of dying, essentially. Just a little bit of background. It's really helpful to understand some of the background of D.A. Powell's work to really completely grasp the meanings behind his art and his work and his words. This specific poem is from his first book called Lunch. Now, D.A. Powell has a trilogy, and his trilogy includes Lunch being his first, Tea being his second, and then Cocktails being his third. So it's funny because the way he named, it's kind of clever how he came up with these names, Lunch, Tea, and Cocktails, because he states in one of his interviews that it's what he constantly found himself eating, or that's all he had for like lunch and for tea and cocktails. That's all he would eat. So I like that he kind of came up with that, and each book, it's written about separate time periods of his life, and they're all written in different styles, in different formats, and he plays around with this. This particular poem is in his first book, so we see a lot of simplicity and a lot of kind of directness, and we see a lot of playing around with punctuation and kind of playing around with words. When we look at the kind of the set of stories that were given for D.A. Powell in this anthology, the first three are actually from his fourth book, Chronic, and each one of them is completely different in style, in substance, in everything, in structure. They're all presented to us in a different way, whether it be kind of more prose, whether it be more poetic. And then we take a look at the next three, and those next three are from Cocktails. And Cocktails is a little bit more divine and glamorous in nature in the way he writes. They all have some sort of religious reference in them, and it's kind of his trilogy is actually compared to the Divine Comedy, because Lunch is purgatory. It's a part of his life that's kind of just, annoying to him. And then he has the Inferno, which is Tea. And the Inferno, Tea, in his book is kind of deals with a lot of dark issues. It deals with him getting diagnosed with HIV and dealing with that situation. it deals with a lot of death and burials and kind of dark topics. And then we see Cocktails, kind of him overcoming everything, overcoming the situation, and experiencing different things. And he writes in kind of a more of a divine, glamorous way, like I said before, with a lot of pop culture references and biblical references. Um, so that's a little bit of the background, and I think it's just important to understand all of that to kind of really appreciate what D.A. Powell is trying to accomplish. I find it ironic that this particular poem is placed at the end of his section because it's the oldest and the most simplest and more direct. And I think that's kind of why I think they, if it's done, if it was done on purpose, why they did it, because the first 6 poems are very intricate, very carefully woven together, and this last story, it's kind of very direct and blunt, and it leaves you with an emotion that's kind of very very real and raw. And the other ones are kind of hazed in a lot of textual and kind of literary tools, and they're kind of fluffed up a little bit. So getting into the poem, just looking at it, he plays a lot with punctuation, and specifically with capitalization and spacing and periods. With the structure of the poem, to begin with, actually, the whole poem is done in couplets that rhyme. They're done in couplets that rhyme, and it's in what is it called, an fragment or something, where like each line kind of connects with the next stanza, so they're kind of all interlinked together. It's like a kind of a recurring thought within the whole poem and not just within each stanza. So going back to the punctuation, with capitalization, for instance, it's very, I feel like the reason that he does this is because he doesn't want to, because in this poem particularly, he's trying to convey the human condition, and convey the thought process of life, in a sense, and kind of the rhythm and the musical beauty and how life works and how the thought process of dying, in a sense, kind of happens. And with capitalization, I feel like it would defeat the purpose of having a formal beginning and end to everything, because when you think, you don't really think in capitals and whatever. It's kind of, you're thinking in random, sporadic thoughts. So that's why I feel like he was kind of trying to do with this poem in particular. And then with the periods and spacing, I read somewhere that with periods, he doesn't like using periods because it always puts a stop to a certain thought or a certain idea. But what he was trying to do here is that he was trying to symbolically show how not only how not only can thoughts continue throughout struggle, but just also show how this person and this subject he's talking about continues to fight on until he can't no more. And it kind of just shows the beauty in dying and kind of the beauty in how his thought process kind of just deprecates. So that on punctuation is very important, and understanding that is super important with D.A. Powell because he uses that so skillfully. And if you don't understand what he's trying to do with his punctuation, then it's very you won't understand. I didn't understand it at first until I researched it further. But when going back to kind of like the rhythm and the rhyme in his in his poem, we see some sort of like, it's kind of like a childlike poem in a sense. Even just the title, "Darling, Can You Kill Me with Your Mickey Mouse Pillows?" It's juxtaposition of two very different ideas of death and of what many would see to be, hold on, my computer locked itself out. What many would seem to be kind of darkness and goodness. You know, Mickey Mouse is kind of like this childhood innocence, and just like Disney in general, we think about, oh my god, like my childhood, and then we see like Darling, Can You Kill Me? So I think that's within the title itself, we kind of see this emotion of this looming darkness over a life, in a sense of this innocence, you know, that is kind of doomed. And we with the rhyming of each couplet, we see pillows, hose, grain, pain, for, or, tank, yank, grip, grip, decline, mine. You know, it kind of, there's this playfulness to it, of kind of this playfulness between death and life, and how he is still hanging on to that innocence. His subject is still hanging on to that innocence and that thought of surviving, and it just creates this connection between, for instance, for me and the subject, that to keep fighting on and to keep, you know, continuing to live. And it's just like this sad tale of like how he kind of wants to die, but at the same time he has to live on. And then another thing that I noticed in this poem is that how he uses lists without commas. Again, going back to the thought process and how he's kind of trying to convey that, I feel like using too much punctuation would kind of hinder that effect. When we see in the second and the fifth stanza, I believe, there's the list: a splinter, a grain, a tatter, a snip, a sliver, a wit, a tittle. We see a thread, a reed, a rack, a ruin, and all of these lists aren't separated by commas or anything else. So it's when you look at it, it goes back to how, well, when you read it, it kind of goes back to the rhythm of the poem, and it goes back to how it's a reflection of not only the thought of, you know, this dying soul and this dying individual, but it's kind of mirroring a heartbeat in a sense. And we see kind of like the dump kind of rhythm going on with his lists, and it's not in every stanza, because I think that would kind of be wouldn't be practical to have that kind of rhythm and everything. It proves its point. It proves its purpose to kind of draw an anticipation within the reader and kind of anticipate, you know, some sort of hope, but also knowing that there is some sort of death at the end of the poem. So yeah, just overall, just reading this poem, D.A. Powell does so much, you know, and I wish I could properly convey my thoughts into words and how I feel about this, but I've never been much for kind of so intricately in precisely conveying my thought process. So yeah, D.A. Powell is probably like my favorite poet ever. I didn't expect to really completely comprehend this poetry, the first part of the poetry unit, because I don't like poetry, and I always see this kind of cliche kind of poem where it's dealing with emotion, with dealing with the human condition, and how it's dealing with like society and all that stuff. And I think it's just overdone. And then when reading D.A. Powell, I feel like he's kind of opened my mind to a lot of different things, and he resonates with me because of his sexuality, and I'm in my sexuality. You know, I draw those connections between his experiences and mine, and that's why I'm able to understand his work. But not only that, the way he does things and everything is so precisely thought through and everything has a meaning, and it's not just this is done because of this, or it's done because, you know, a poet wants to make it complicated. It's done because in it does some sort of, it provokes some sort of thought, and it provokes some sort of emotion, and it draws a connection between not only the poet and the reader, but the poet and the experience that the reader and the experience. It draws a connection between the reader and the experience the poet is trying to tie together. So yeah, I'm already at 15:36, which is a lot more than my other video. Dang, I can't. Ugh. But I'll stop talking. I love D.A. Powell. Peace and blessings. Have a good one.